Clashes between demonstrators and police are expected to ramp up this weekend following divisive immigration arrests last week. On the ground in Los Angeles, the National Guard remains under federal control after an appeals court paused a prior ruling that ordered President Trump to return control of the force to the state's governor. Tessa Bennett has been following the story this week and joins us with the latest. Tessa?
Yeah, Manisa, today marks a full week since the protests began in response to the ICE raids, and resolution remains out of reach. Nighttime curfews are being enforced, and police are arresting more demonstrators each day. And during an FBI conference regarding the protests yesterday, another Democratic senator was met with resistance by a member of Trump's administration.
When it comes to Los Angeles or other cities, if we see other cities are gearing up, and these people are agitators, they're paid, they're professionals, they're insurrectionists, they're troublemakers.
Tensions remain at an all-time high in Los Angeles. Today marks the end to a full week of demonstrations across the city in response to ICE raids that's seen the arrest of hundreds of protesters, sparked a lawsuit, and brought in the National Guard. The Marines are currently bolstering a deployment of about 2,000 National Guard troops on active duty in LA, helping ICE agents and managing the civil unrest at the request of President Trump. California Governor Gavin Newsom filed a lawsuit against Trump's administration for federalizing the National Guard without the state's consent and asked the courts to prevent the use of the military for actions like ICE arrests. But a federal appeals court paused a prior ruling that required Trump to return control of the troops to the state.
I think we are going to see Newsom and other leaders really position themselves on this issue, both personally and then values-wise, in terms of both how they speak up for Californians and people affected by this issue, undocumented immigrants, people of color across the United States, but then also personally how they could potentially benefit from phrasing themselves as "I'm the key opposition leader against Trump."
But Newsom isn't the only Californian politician tangled in the mess.
Or the secretary, because the fact of the matter is a half a dozen violent criminals that you're rotating on your
I also want to talk about
Democratic Senator Alex Padilla, California's first Latino elected to the Senate, was forcefully removed from a conference yesterday and ordered to the ground after attempting to ask a question to Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem.
I was there peacefully. At one point, I had a question, and so I began to ask a question. I was almost immediately forcibly removed from the room. I was forced to the ground, and I was handcuffed.
The conference was being held in the LA FBI headquarters on the administration's response to the protests.
If this is how this administration responds to a senator with a question, if this is how the Department of Homeland Security responds to a senator with a question, you can only imagine what they're doing to farm workers, to cooks, to day laborers out in the Los Angeles community and throughout California and throughout the country.
For her part, Noem says the Secret Service thought he was an attacker and officers acted appropriately. Now, the feeling of unrest is spreading nationwide, with nearly 2,000 protests and events denouncing Trump's actions planned for tomorrow, on the same day the president is holding a military parade in Washington.
I think there's a very good potential that this will carry on for the foreseeable future. I think the sentiment among the people isn't going away, and I think Trump's emboldened stance isn't going away either.
With protests planned across the country for tomorrow, some states are preparing for the possible deployment of National Guard troops. Missouri's governor has already activated the state's National Guard, calling it a precautionary measure. Florida, though, is taking it a step further, with one sheriff saying anyone who throws a brick or points a gun at an officer will be killed.